And so I'd love to get us
This meeting is being
started. My name is Brian Torby, and I'm excited to welcome everyone here to another in the installment of ongoing series. It's been so much fun to work on with the HGAR team called the Be Your Best series. We've got a very exciting panel of experts today. I think this might be one of our largest panels across the board today. And we're really excited to get into, I think, a not fully well-known topic for many inside the real estate community, and share some information and perspective from all these experts that I think will help, as I've talked about this topic with a number of people, will, I think, help really give some perspective and possibly and likely impact how people transact their business here in New York City a bit. So with that, Richard, I'm going to turn it over to you. I want to say thank you to you and the HGAR team for having us here.
Thank you so much, Brian, and welcome everybody. And we are back with our webinar series to share best practices for getting real estate deals done in New York. I'm Rich Haggerty, CEO of the Hudson Gateway Association of Realtors. We're a not-for-profit trade association representing more than 13,000 real estate professionals in Manhattan, the Bronx, Westchester, Putnam, Rockland, and Orange counties. I'm also President and Chief Strategic Growth Officer for One Key MLS, the comprehensive multiple listing service for the New York region. One Key has over 46,000 subscribers and serves the region from Montauk to Manhattan to Monticello. Today, we're looking at energy efficiency guidelines in New York. What do they mean? Are co-ops and condos making the grade? What are the costs of non-compliance? So I think this is a topic that is extremely timely, and I think we're going to be sharing some really valuable information. Our panel of experts will outline the ABCs of building grades, gradings, and what you need to know to get the deals done. As always, we're very pleased to partner with TitleVest and have President Brian Torby moderate our discussion. TitleVest is the leading New York City-based title insurance agency and member of the First American family of companies, offering a full range of services for real estate property purchase and refinance transactions. TitleVest has offices in Manhattan and Westchester and engages in transactions upstate, downstate, and nationwide. TitleVest has won the New York Law Journal's Best Title Agency Award every year since 2013. That is quite the streak, Brian.
Thank you.
Now let's meet our panel. We're pleased to have with us Bruce Cohen. Bruce, I want to say this is your third time, maybe even your fourth time joining us for this series. We're always so pleased to have you. Bruce is a partner in the New York law firm Cohen and Frankel, which specializes in real estate in Manhattan and the region. Also joining us is Dennis DiPaolo. Dennis is the Executive Vice President and Director of Compliance at Orchid Realty, one of New York City's largest property management companies. We also have Peter Goldberg with us today. Peter is the pilot manager at Con Edison in New York. And we have Juan Reyes. Juan is a partner at the international law firm of I'm going to try to get this right, Juan, Baker G, Biddle, and Ria. Am I close?
Yeah, it's Bakery Drinker.
Okay.
Thank you.
Then Juan, Peter, Dennis, Bruce, thank you so much for being here for this very timely topic. It's interesting, Brian, because the whole concept of trying to combat global warming is all over the news. Obviously, we had the landmark legislation that was passed by the Senate last week, late in the week. I think the House is tackling it tomorrow. And you were involved in a very exciting project I noticed on your Instagram feed called the Carbon Almanac. It's not too late. So before we dive in, can you just fill us a little bit into that project you were involved in?
Sure. It's a project led by a best-selling author named Seth Godin. Many of you in the audience and on the panel probably have read some of his other seminal works. And it's outside his normal purview. And he reached out to a number of people that he built relationships with over the years. And I'm lucky enough to be someone that had become friendly with him. He lives here in the New York Hudson Valley area. And he wanted to create a book that was meant to be an almanac, a source of information and truly like nonpartisan, just very digestible nuggets of information centered around the science that is all around the whole carbon cycle and sort of the carbon impact, greenhouse gases, all these different things. And it's a fabulous book. We actually just had a fun little project. We set a Guinness Book of World Records by having the most book signings in 24-hour period across the globe, because the way Seth built this book was he reached out to people to contribute both in writing, editing, marketing, graphic design, all these things from all over the world through his sort of personal network. And it's hundreds of authors and contributors came together to put together this book. And it's a really cool, sort of example of a resource book that you can pick it up and read a little article and walk away definitely, I think, in many ways, like our panelists are going to do for our audience today, like surprised at what you didn't know and much better off for sort of now understanding how these different things work in the world and how you can have a positive impact or some of your unintended negative impact. So it's currently on sale. I encourage everyone to go get it. It's I'm making $0 off it, not in the least. It's been an entirely volunteer project, but one that I've loved being part of and meeting people all around the globe who've been participating in creating it. And we're now doing a whole series of podcasts around it, as well as a lot of material. We've actually got a series of events with the New York Public Library. There's a whole bunch of great things happening around it. So I encourage everyone to go check out the Carbon Almanac and all the good things happening around it.
And that's so exciting. Really what we're talking about today is how New York City is trying to tackle reducing the carbon footprint of buildings in New York City. So this title or this topic couldn't be more relevant for today.
Yeah. For me, this is, this is a nice intersection of my professional passions in real estate and keeping everyone appraised and practicing the best they can, and sort of the personal passion of trying to make the planet a better place for our kids and leave it better than we found it. Well, Richard, thank you so much for again hosting for that, sort of that introduction there of everyone. And thank you to Jeff, Kathleen, the whole HGAR team for making these events come together. We're excited to do today's. A few quick housekeeping items for everyone in attendance today. We'll be taking your questions through the Q&A function here in Zoom. So please make sure to go find it depending on the device you're on. It's either at the bottom of your screen or the top. And it's two little chat bubbles over top of each other, and you can submit your questions. We'll be pursuing and weaving those into today's conversation at the appropriate time. Otherwise, we're going to keep everyone muted during today's conversation, but you can use the chat function to also toss in your comments or your accolades or agreement or things, although please do put the questions you'd like asked in the Q&A function. Richard, before we launch fully in, there's a lot happening in the market, both stock markets, but really here in our real estate market, driven interest rate changes, all the things happening, sales velocity. You always give us excellent insights, leveraging all the one key technology and massive flow of data. Are you game to share some of the insights that you're seeing in the market right now? Sure,
it'd be my pleasure, but I'm going to sound like a broken record. So I'm looking at numbers comparing July of 2022 to July of 2021. And this is MLS wide, so we're covering a tremendously large geography, but closed sales for single family homes down about 15%. For condos, closed sales down close to 26%. Closed sales for co-ops down right around 6%. Prices for all three are up. But from my perspective, this is not any time to panic because we're comparing apples and oranges. We all know that what happened in 2021 was just an overheated market that was rebounding from COVID, and it was benefiting from a lot of folks who were looking for larger properties on more land. And that market in 2021, we know was not sustainable. So we're seeing a market correction that really needs to happen. We hadn't seen a market correction happen in a very long time. Even when you look at 2020, where the market really shut down for almost an entire quarter, that second half of 2020 just came back so strongly.
Yes.
So I really get nervous if you don't see market corrections. That's when you start to harken back to Alan Greenspan talking about irrational exuberance. I think market corrections really create a more healthy market overall. So I think in looking at these numbers and then really comparing them to 2019, which was a comparable market, it's still showing, a lot of stability. So from my perspective, no need to panic, no need to pay attention to the screaming headlines. I think we're in pretty darn good shape.
Yeah. And I'm curious, and you may not have this data at your fingertips, from a pricing standpoint, sort of median pricing, are we seeing that drop, or are we continuing to see that stay steady or increase? And you may not have fingertips.
I do have it.
Oh, you
medium sales price for single family homes up 8.5%.
Okay.
The increases are slowing. I still think we need to see a market correction, quite frankly, when it comes to price. And I think that's going to happen because inventory, quite frankly, is still a really big problem. And there are no easy issues in trying to correct the housing inventory problem. So I do think we'll see moderation of pricing. And I think that that's going to be a natural result of slowing prices. So, I'm sorry, slowing sales.
So slowing velocity. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Well, thank you for the updates, and glad I don't have to lose any sleep tonight. That makes me happy. Well, with that, let's get into today's conversation on, sort of the greening of New York City. Dennis, we're going to start with you to ask you to give everyone here in our audience just a quick, light primer and explanation of the sort of regulations that we're talking about that give rise to all these other implications we're going to be talking about today.
Sure, thank you. And thank you, Brian and Richard, for having me as part of your panel. This is a topic that I'm very passionate about. And it's also something I do in my job as Director of Compliance of Orsett Realty. We manage about 200 buildings throughout New York City. So for the last 3 or 4 years, we've been struggling with these various laws. And we're going to be talking primarily about 3 different laws. Local Law 84, the energy benchmarking. Local Law 95, which is the energy efficiency grades that you see around buildings. And the big elephant in the room, the Climate Mobilization Act, Local Law 97, and what the requirements are of that law that are so rigorous. So, sorry.
There you go. You're back.
So on the first statute, energy benchmarking, we've been benchmarking energy consumption in New York City for about 12 years, since 2009. And basically that's just plugging in building data and energy, electricity, water, fuel oil, natural gas consumption for the previous calendar year. And that just spits out a score. But until recently, there was a very minimal effect. There was no consequences for the building's carbon footprint. Most recently, Local Law 95 came around, which is the posting of energy efficiency grades. This has been the year 2020, and every October you get a new grade based upon the prior year's benchmarking, and it goes on the front of the building. So you should be seeing these throughout the city. And I'm just going to pull this up as a sample so everybody can see what I'm talking about. This is a sample of the building's energy efficiency rating. As you can see here, this particular building has a C, which is a score of 68 on a 1 to 100. You can see the little arrow there, which points to the C grade. And all the way at the bottom left, you can see the New York City average for the year was a 54. So this building did pretty well as compared to peer buildings throughout the city. And again, this is just the result of the energy benchmarking from the prior year's data that was submitted. Let's stop the share. Now, again, the other statutes that we're referring to, the Climate Mobilization Act is what we're really worried about here. Hold on. So Local Law 97, the Climate Mobilization Act, is one of the most ambitious local efforts in the country to reduce carbon emissions. The goal is to reduce carbon emissions by 80% of current levels by the year 2050. This is New York City's first attempt to use the stick approach as opposed to the carrot. Previously, there have been a lot of great programs, NYSERDA through Con Ed as well, to help encourage buildings invest in their infrastructure to try to reduce their carbon footprints. But what's coming in 2024, and then again on a much lower threshold in 2030, are these carbon emission caps and penalties. So the buildings will be actually on the clock in 2024, just roughly 17 months from now. So their carbon emissions will be put in, and they'll be subject to a cap in 2024. We estimate that roughly 80% of buildings in New York City that are subject to the law will see a fine by the 2030 threshold in the year 2031 when the fine will be imposed. The fine for exceeding the cap under the Climate Mobilization Act is $268 per metric ton of carbon emissions that exceed the cap. What we found is that this is literally the most expensive carbon pricing in the world. A recent study showed that only Sweden, Switzerland, and Uruguay have caps and pricing in the $130 to $140 range. So New York City's carbon pricing is going to be well in excess of this.
Yeah. And Dennis, that sounds, you're good?
Yeah, that's pretty much at the high level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think that's a great primer. And that is, like, just to think about it, that's, 268 is twice the top pricing in the rest of the world. New York City is double that and again, to use your reference, that's the stick. Like that's a stick with some nails in it. So with that, Juan, we're going to turn over to you to tell us, where did this come from? Talk a little bit, Juan, you've got a lot of experience and expertise and connectivity in your prior positions and your current position in sort of understanding why these sausages are made and how they're made within the governmental, gears and process. So can you tell us a little bit of your perspective on where does regulation come from and why, and a little bit of the background from that political perspective?
Sure. So this has been going on, I would say mainly since the Bloomberg era, 2008, 2009. There were a package of laws that actually got a lot of pushback from the real estate community, and now it's come to fruition. But Speaker Quinn and Mayor Bloomberg in 2008 tried to pass Local Law 33, and it did not go through. And so that's when it was a package. It was Local Law 85, 84, 85, 87, 88. So that didn't work out. So that's when they started doing this evaluation of what impact do the buildings have. I mean, we know that they're probably about 70% of the air pollution comes from buildings in New York City. And so they started measuring the data in hopes that someday it would come to this. And it finally did come in 2017 when de Blasio signed the local law. But, it came from a lot of people doing a lot of hard work and trying to understand, where the technology was. The real estate industry was definitely a player. They throw around terms like an unfunded mandate, right? So they're afraid that it was too much of a burden to be able to meet the goals. But as technology improves, I think Hudson Yards and World Trade Center, you see such goals being achieved to lessen emissions. So I think the idea are from earlier on, say, beginning Bloomberg's administration, and it was one of a grouping of things, right? He was really trying to improve recycling. Congestion pricing is another, which had been around for a long time, but I think Mayor Bloomberg was able to get it to reality, and it's still at DOT. There's a negotiation with Federal Highways and the city of how it's going to be implemented. Also, MTA has a role, but all these things were part of an overall push to try to make New York and the United States more clean society. Part of it was the Paris Accord was helping move that forward socially. So I would just say it's really something that came from the beginning of Bloomberg's administration and Speaker Quinn being very supportive. And I think that's why we were able to hear what the real estate industry had to say and get to where we are today, where it's achievable.
Yeah. And it feels like, and we're going to get into this here shortly, because Dennis, I'm going to turn to you to give some examples of a couple buildings and like sort of how this shows up in an actual building, but like it's a big hill to climb, as we're about to see, but it's in part with, you know, Peter and the Con Ed resources and great attorneys like you want, like it's a climbable hill now. It's just still a big hill. Like there's work to be done, but we can get to the top of it. So Dennis, with that, are you game to share and sort of walk us through how some of these regulations, as they apply to a specific building, right? So we've got local law 95 that says, okay, you've got your building grade is a C at this grade, and you'll give us our examples. And then what does that translate as we then look at their actual operational energy efficiency and their carbon footprint? What does that translate into the benchmarks here in the near term, right? Our 2024 standard or 2030 standard, that's a stiffer standard to hit. What does it translate into in sort of penalties, the amount of work that would be needed, that kind of stuff? And I know you and the ORCID operation, there's this great figure, and I won't get it exactly right, but I was chatting with Neil Davidowitz of ORCID, and he said, you know, something like, and Dennis, you can correct me, like you've had conversations on this exact topic with 99% of all your boards. And I think it's something like 95% of them are on track to not be penalized, or they know they are, but they're making a decision to like take a little slap because they're delaying the work because of some other logistics reason. But like you basically got all of your hundreds of buildings on track for this. It's a lot of work, but they're on track. But there's a lot of buildings out there in New York that aren't, you know, ORCID has really taken a lead from a managed property management firm in this. There are a lot of buildings that are not. And that's where we turn to our real estate community here. We've got agents, brokers, and other participants today who are representing transactions in buildings that building and board are not paying attention, and their managing agent may not be paying attention to this topic. So give us some examples, Dennis, of like what this could look like for an example building.
Sure. Just taking a step back, I saw a question in the chat in the Q&A, which buildings this applies to. Initially in 2009, under the Greater Buildings Plan, it was buildings 50,000 square feet or larger. But later amendments to the law came in. Now it applies to all buildings 25,000 square feet or larger. I know within our portfolio, we have small co-ops and condominiums, 8 to 10 units, that are subject to the law, that they are greater than 25,000 square feet. So this is the vast majority of all buildings in New York City, residential, commercial, et cetera.
Well, and Dennis, am I correct in recounting that one of the things that's being considered in the next sort of stage of this is bringing that down to 10,000? For certain parts of it, they're considering bringing it down to buildings over 10,000 square feet need to hit these things. It's a more limited scope, but there is still some implications on buildings as small as 10,000 square feet, correct?
Yes, as these laws are rolling out the actual compliance with them, the city is still tweaking and making changes such as those. What exactly has to be certified? Is it a registered architect that's going to have to file a certification for the building size? A lot of your scoring depends on demographics, the number of bedrooms in the apartment, in the building, the number of units in the building, the usage. Is it all residential, or is there some professional or commercial? All these things are going to lead to, again, very expensive carbon penalties. And so all of this data has to be certified. To date, the benchmarking was never certified. It was just what was publicly available, what you had available, looking at the offering plan there. But the certification process as we get to 2024 is going to be very rigorous, and the rules from the Department of Buildings have yet to be written. So we're going out and, again, just really beating this drum with all of our boards, getting an analysis done each and every year for their benchmarking. Take a look at what their projected penalties are going to be. I'm going to share a couple of these with you right now. This is an example of what we've done. I've redacted some of the building address to protect them. But basically, this building is pretty much on average. The benchmarking scores you see is a 53, which is right around the building average. And unfortunately, it is a D letter grade on the front of the building, which is frustrating. But they are not scheduled to have a financial penalty here in 2024 because you can see their current carbon emissions based upon last year's benchmarking were 1,188 tons of carbon emissions. And the threshold for 2024 will be 1,666 tons. However, once you get to the 2030 emissions cap, which will be 961 for a building of this size, they'll be paying an annual, if they do nothing else, they'll be paying an annual penalty of $60,000 unless they reduce their carbon emissions by roughly 19%. So what does that mean? What they have to do? They have to look at all these types of projects. They have to look at their heating and cooling plant, see if they can upgrade there. They'll have to look at their hot water plant. They'll have to look at the fuel. Are they burning oil? Can they switch to natural gas? Elevator modernization, consider storage panels, cogen. All these major capital projects should be looked at now. The next example I have is a building that did a little worse, and you can see again, roughly building average 47, which is right near the New York City average of 52, and yet they will have a penalty in 2024, a small penalty, but they'll start being in the red in the penalties shortly. So every building owner, including co-op and condominium boards of directors, have to be looking at this and seeing what they need to do to get under these emissions caps.
Well, and Dennis, let me ask a clarifying question, because it's so if you keep your screen up here for, oh, it went away. But if you pop it back up to help the audience think about this, the letter grade is, and Peter, Dennis, I'll turn this to you, or Peter, you're welcome to chime in. The letter grade is a general indication of the building's efficiency standards, but it doesn't necessarily directly translate to the estimated emissions down in so for this building that we're looking at right now, is that 507? Yeah, 507 for 2024. The letter grade doesn't exactly directly. So you may have buildings that have higher emissions relative to their grade and might have bigger penalties, even though their grade isn't as bad. Is that correct?
That is correct. The number score and later the more recent letter score is really just the EPA portfolio software spitting out
right.
grades. And it's based upon various coefficients that are assigned to the different fuels: natural gas, electricity, oil. Peter, can you elaborate?
I mean, I think you're absolutely on point. The letter grade's ultimately about how much energy you're using relative to what EPA thinks is normal, where it fits on the curve. But like you were saying, different forms of energy have different carbon intensities. So if you're using a carbon intensive fuel, like fuel oil, then you might be emitting a lot of carbon, even if you're not using a whole lot of energy.
Right. And we're going to come back to that, Peter, in a little bit around the greening of the grid and some of the cool things that Con Ed is doing that are going to have some positive implications on this. Well, for a second, I want to help bring this all the way back down to our audience today around transactional real estate. We're here with the HGAR community who are transacting on co-ops, condos, townhouses, mixed use, et cetera, throughout New York City. And they're responsible for helping guide their client, the buyer or the seller, through that transaction. And this is an area of subject matter that before, really now, I think hasn't been on that checklist and that due diligence process and that thought process as it relates to looking at what properties to buy, or if you're looking to sell, or if you're, Richard, during our prep session, there's this magical moment where Richard was like, hey, can you look up, I live at this address. Can you look up my building? How bad is my grade? Are we going to have bad penalties? Should I go list my apartment now, even though I love it, right? Because if you're in a building that suddenly is going to have a bad grade and have very expensive capital project, that has a negative impact on value, right? Just like with any other major assessment, if you're in a building and you get a word that the whole roof or all the facade is going to have to be replaced and it's going to be millions of dollars, that's going to hurt your potential sales price, or you're going to carry that special assessment. So Bruce, I want to turn to you here as our, chief transaction manager, right? You're involved working with real estate agents and their customers, the buyers and sellers, every day of the week, helping really be the expert guiding them through all the nuances of a transaction, and do a fabulous job at it. And you're one of New York City's preeminent attorneys in the space. tell us some of your thoughts as you're translating what we're hearing here today into what does it mean for practicing transactional real estate?
Well, thank you, by the way. Thank you, Richard, for having me, and Brian and everybody. I would just say that this is kind of a wake-up call, because I don't think one attorney has had a discussion with me about this since ever. I mean, this is, you know, and this is something that's really on the horizon. I mean, right off the top of my head, you know, there's certain words that come into our lexicon, like during the first Iraqi war, I think it was sortie. I'd never heard the word sortie before. And, you know, some of the COVID expressions, and you see it from time to time. And I think we're in the frontier of this now. So just common sense off the top of my head, I think we have to start adding some things into our due diligence questionnaire and asking certain questions. And I don't know if I know what all the exact questions are. I have some idea. And I would say that this is kind of like when the Soho, you know, for 20 years, they've been talking about the Soho rezoning. Then all of a sudden, the last mayor came up with some crazy penalties, and the new mayor reduced them. But let me tell you, there's still some issues out there. However, on that one, and one of the things I was talking to Brian about, you know, before was, I wonder if, and that's one question I'm just going to throw out to the rest of the panel. I don't know if there are any plans of, if people make good faith efforts, if there would be extensions or things like that. I don't know if there are lawsuits questioning the constitutionality. Listen, I think it's great, green and whatever, but I'm just, as an attorney and as the broker, how does it affect the broker? Forget how it affects me. I always say to the brokers, if there's something really bad about a building, you may not want to bring your client there, because they'll think, like, why didn't you know that once we, you know, really look into what the items are? So the first thing you do is, and I think what I've learned from Brian in a couple of conversations, is the grade isn't necessarily everything. There are nuances to the grade. So what is everything? Everything is, how much is it going to cost and how are you going to pay for it? So the simplest thing somebody would add, but I don't think it's enough on their questionnaire, is what are you doing with regards to this? Are you making plans now? If so, do you have any idea what it's going to cost? It's almost like the local law 10 as well. That's another, you know, pretty good. When it started, it was just, you know, local law 10, it was a number. Now it's 11. Then all of a sudden it became the most expensive thing other than labor on a budget. This has the potential to do that. So again, I'm not going to take credit for this. Brian said buildings that are smart will start hiring people now, because once everybody realizes it's going to be hard to get people that are going to do the necessary work. So what kind of questions would I want to know? I did a little research. I read a couple things: LED lights, windows, cold water pump system. Supposedly it saves 50%. You know, they throw these numbers out. I don't know what they mean dollar wise. Insulation, how's the building insulated? One of the other things Brian pointed out to me is, it's not just because it's a new building that you're going to get an A. I mean, there's that glass building downtown. I don't remember the name of it. And I think they're having some trouble with the windows in the building. But if cold air can get in, then, you know, common sense just tells you the carbon, you know, what effect it's going to have on the carbon footprint. So I really, I'm more all ears right now to try to determine what it is I have to add and find out. And for the brokers, you should at least find out if they've been dealing with it, if they have any plans. And like the brokers that refer me, if they tell me an address, I would make a quick call to the managing agents and just try to get an idea. I think everybody's going to be surprised that not only has another attorney never mentioned it, I've seen, like, in looking at minutes, maybe one or two entries that say, we're going to have to start thinking about dealing with this. And for some reason, I saw it way out in the future, like 2032 or 2030. So this is going to be quite a wake-up call for people.
Yeah. And Bruce, you're one of the busier, practicing high-end real estate, residential transactional firms in the city. And I think it's an interesting perspective that you're speaking truth to, which is it is a bit of a wake-up call. Like this has been coming along, and individuals like Juan and Peter and Dennis, like this has been, to some degree, a center of their focus and attention and awareness and expertise on this kind of topic. But the residential transactional world, I think, is not widely aware of this at all. And it's going to start having, like you said, it's going to start changing the due diligence process. It's going to start changing some of the contract negotiation, like what happens if they haven't looked at this and they do, and during the middle of the contract, suddenly they figure out, oh, we got to do a $10 million special. We're going to go take out debt on the building and do a special assessment for that new mortgage to go fund these repairs or retrofitting. Like all of a sudden, if you're still mid-contract, is that a meaning? Can I get out of contract because that special assessment is $10,000 a month on my unit, right? Like that's things to be thinking about. And you need an attorney who's paying attention to those nuances and on that cutting edge. Because I agree. Everyone I keep talking to about it in the transactional residential world, principally speaking, they've sort of heard about it. They're like, oh yeah, that's that thing out there. They haven't really heard about it. Richard, I saw you unmuted. Did you have a question or a
I just
comment you
wanted to
wanted
chime
to add?
into what Bruce
Yeah.
was saying. I live in a pre-war building built in 1920. I just assumed that my building was going to have issues. I mean, we control the heat in winter by opening and closing our windows. It's one of those buildings.
That's your thermostat, right? It's like,
yeah, that's it. But at the same time, Dennis was kind enough to look up the grade on our building, and it's actually got a really good grade.
got a really good grade.
So I think one of the things we have to do, just like Bruce just said, don't make assumptions, look at the facts. And Dennis has already talked about several of those factors that factor into the ultimate grade. And so we really have to collectively educate ourselves and not make assumptions.
Yeah, I'm sorry, can I jump in for 1 second?
Yep.
You're gonna see, not yet, not at the beginning, but at some point in time, these things are gonna be baked in, and you're gonna see, I think, either price reductions or sellers putting money in escrow, to cover some of these. I realize at first it's very hard. People will say, what are you talking about? Because they don't know any more than we did before we did the seminar, so to speak. But I think that you're probably going to see more and more of that. And I think it probably, again, this is primarily for the brokers. So I always try to put the focus when I speak on what the brokers should be thinking about. Explaining the issue to your co-broker, the broker on the other side, the selling broker, because they are going to have this problem with any buyer, especially once people find out about this. The Real Deal is going to start doing not one article, it's going to be in every article about how much it could be. And if you're a seller's broker, you've got to warn your purchaser, like people are warning their Soho. I have a lot of Soho brokers who say, hey, what do I do? And it's hard in that one because I don't think we really know on that one what's going to end up shaking out. The people who would know more, any talk of extensions of people or anything like anything like that?
Bruce, I'm going to hold up. We're going to come to Juan,
Okay.
who I think does have some good perspective.
That'd be great.
Yeah, it's like anything else, there's a rule until there's the rule, right? So they'll come up with a rule and then you start like really looking at it, and that's why it's important to be ahead of it, right? And you say, okay, well, how much is it going to cost me? And so I think what the best thing to do if you have a building is really try to find out from department buildings, right? Either from, by your expediter or your attorney, what they're going to require. And yeah, you have a little time, before they actually put in that first penalty. But I would, they have an idea of what they want to do. And this happened when they first started doing the letter grades for the restaurants. Like people started panicking, and then there was a blank, right? So you go in a building and it didn't even have the letter, and there were all these fast and furious negotiations between Department of Health and the restaurant or club or whatever it was, to see, okay, how are we really going to be graded? So if I was on the board of a building or representing a building, I would quietly try to start talking to buildings and say, well, you know, I know it's a little controversial to some degree because efficiency could be 73%, but I'm still getting a B, right? Or not a great letter grade. So how can, you know, whatever I'm representing to the public, if I'm really a pretty good operator, I shouldn't be a B or C. Like, could we work on tweaking this? And how can I just stay out of trouble, you know, from the get-go? Because you don't even want to have to like start off on the wrong foot, you know. So that's what I would do. Personally, I would talk to the you know, whatever borough building commissioner office and start trying to figure out, okay, how are we going to interact? And it should be a friendly discussion, right? It's like, it was better off settling these things before it becomes a major issue.
Right. And that's where, you know, Juan, I think that's great advice. And that's where an attorney such as yourself comes into play. It's like, not every building board president or even every managing agent has someone who can go broker that conversation, right? And know the particulars and the expertise and have the political understanding to sort of understand how to go have that conversation. Before I want to come back to more some of like the future of this and how is this going to unfold and tap some of your expertise, Juan. But before we do that, I want to turn to Peter, who's, you know, our silent powerhouse here, who's got some real resources and things. So Peter, you know, we all pay our Con Ed bill. And, you know, I think one of the things that many of us, you know, this is the other thing everyone's going to learn today is that when you look at your Con Ed bill, there's a line on there, somewhere down there, I don't know exactly what it's called, that helps fund proactive engagement that Con Ed does out into the real estate community and real estate ownership space. You help lead a lot of that proactive engagement. And I want you to share with us, like, so there's everybody in paying their Con Ed bill is helping fund this larger potential and set of initiatives that Con Ed is deploying. And there's some of them that are focused on addressing the kinds of carbon load and impact that are being you know, being penalized if you don't address them. And so Con Ed is actually, I think for many buildings, a wonderful potential partner and resource in tackling the challenging retrofitting and other kind of activities they need to do. So can you talk a little bit about, I think you have like an example building to walk us through like the problem they faced, how Con Ed was able to help, et cetera. So I'll turn it over to you, sir.
Yeah, absolutely. Last year, Con Edison gave over $200 million in incentives to customers to either make their buildings more efficient or to electrify their space and water heating. So that's a lot of money. 34 million of that went to multifamily buildings, including condos. And I'd like to give you an example of how it could help potentially a building like yours. Last year, we worked with Parkchester South Condominiums.
Oh.
And they were looking for opportunities to reduce their energy expenditures and looked at a bunch of different options. And the one that stood out for them were insulation jackets for their pipes and valves, pipe insulation. And these insulation jackets prevent heat from escaping through the pipes and valves. So more of the heat produced by the boiler gets to the tenants. And it's the kind of measure that any building with a boiler should consider. In this instance, it was a big project, 20 buildings, 3,500 linear feet of pipe, and ultimately 700 insulation jackets. The cost was $865,000. So
a lot of insulation.
A lot of insulation. And they came to Con Edison seeing if they could get an incentive that would make that project more attractive to them. And Con Edison was able to provide an incentive of over $600,000. It covered 70% of the project cost. The remaining cost was $260,000, and the payback period was only 3 months. So it became pretty much a no-brainer for them. And that kind of project is going to help with your energy grades, and it could help a lot with Local Law 97. This project saved almost 1,600 metric tons of carbon dioxide. That level of savings could amount to $425,000 in avoided fines annually.
let's just Peter, I just want to pause and like just pause and like let that sink in. So again, nonpartisan here, but like that's a lot of car trips saved or airplane flights saved. Like that's a lot of carbon not put out into the environment, right? Huge win. And $400,000 in penalties avoided, never paid a year. $400,000 a year. Now, if you're a unit owner in the Parkchester, I know it well. We do a lot of transactions there. It's a big, right? There's a lot of units, but $400,000 a year split anyway, any number of ways, is still a lot of money if you're going to face it every year. And those are current penalties, right? They get even worse as we go forward farther into the future. So perfect example. Keep going. I give the mic. I just wanted to that's big numbers.
Brian, just to piggyback on what you're saying, what Peter's talking about is being proactive. And I think if we focus more on being proactive and not on the fines, we'll all benefit. You know, the fines are going to be a pain. Like I was freaking out. I was thinking my building's going to be fined like crazy. I'm not going to be able to sell it. But I think if we're proactive and recognize that we've got to try to solve this problem, we're all going to be much better off. So I think, Peter, that's just a perfect example.
And it's relatively low hanging fruit compared to some other things that you might do. Pipe installation's a relatively easy project. And I'll just restate the numbers. After Con Edison incentives, the project cost was $260,000. The energy savings alone, it was three-month payback period. So the energy savings alone add up to almost, I think, over $1 million a year. And that's before you get to the potential fines. So there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. Definitely engage with Con Edison, and I think we'll talk about this maybe in a little bit, but be proactive, figure out what you can do now, and make a plan for the things that you have to do in the future.
Talking about low-hanging fruit and things you could do, as part of your due diligence, talk to your clients and boards and ask for their local law 87 energy audit. This is another law that applies to all buildings 25,000 square feet or larger, and we're just reaching the end of the first 10-year period within which every building subject to the law had to do a full-blown energy audit. It's a ASHRAE level 2 audit by an engineer. And they go look at all of the different systems, and they do require certain retro commissioning that has to be done in the year of the report, and such things as pipe insulation and valves, et cetera. But that's the number one thing we're seeing in the local 87 reports, these pipe insulation. But there's another section of the report which talks about proactive measures, things that should be done. And it will speak in terms of payback period, just as Peter was indicating. And these reports are a great resource for boards who want to know what to do, what to put in your long-term capital plan to reduce carbon emissions, to reduce energy bills, and also to avoid fines and penalties.
Yeah, Dennis, that's a great, again, perfect for our Be Your Best series. Like that's a note to take down. Like this is a thing to ask for and be looking at on every transaction, whether you're buy side or sell side, or proactively going and talking to your clients who own units in buildings. And this is a reason to have a touch point with someone who owns a unit of building that may list with you at some point in the future. Hey, let's go look into this for your building and see if your building's on top of this, or maybe not. You know, like you, Richard, maybe they should think about selling if their grade weren't as great as your amazing grade was. Although there's a chance that, you know, between Dennis and Peter and Juan, they might have been able to up your grade while Dennis was looking up. Like they've got a lot of pull. So maybe that's how your building got such a great grade. With that, I want to be mindful of time. We've got only 10 minutes left. And these sessions always go so fast and there's so much great content to get to. I want to turn to and really try to leave our audience with some strong, actionable things. And I'm going to go through all the panelists and ask you to answer the question, like, how best should, the realtor, the unit owner or buyer, or more specifically the board in many cases, how should they be engaging with you or sort of your part, the part you play in the industry as a resource, right? So Peter, I'm going to start with you. Con Ed, we've got people here who have connectivity and fingers on the pulse of, probably thousands of New York City residential buildings and some commercial as well. What's the best means of engagement? What are sort of the advice you'd give? And then, Juan and Dennis and Bruce, I'm going to circle around to each of you.
Sure. So the fastest, easiest way to engage with us is to check out our website. It'll have the information about eligibility and incentive levels, and submit an interest form. It's very short. It'll take 2 minutes, if that. And then our contractor, Willdan Energy Solutions, can reach out, schedule a phone call, ask about your building or buildings, and discuss the opportunities for saving energy and the incentives from Con Edison that you'd be able to qualify for. And then they can help you apply for those, help you give you a list of contractors that are already engaged with us, that participate in our program, and get you started to do a project, complete the work. I'll add that if you already have a contractor, someone you already like, someone you already work with, they're welcome to join our network and help you apply for incentives that way. And before handing over the mic, I'll mention that until the end of October, we are working with Ascentium Capital to provide 0 down, 0% financing for multifamily buildings that invest in an energy efficiency project.
Wow, that's another great kicker on top of a really great thing. So that's wonderful. Juan, I'm going to turn to you next. You know, like, you help clients navigate some of the most complex waters that those on the outside is like, wouldn't even know how to swim in those waters whatsoever. So give some thoughts and guidance on how you think about that for our customer base here.
So, you know, a lot of times there'll be issues with buildings that, say, a developer or a buyer obtains, and they'll have something, say, like for physical cultural establishments that have or gym, they're supposed to get a special permit for that. But Department of Buildings won't prosecute a building or give violations that they know they're actively pursuing to try to get the permit, right? The PTE permit, right? So I think in a case like this, where, you know, you develop with your engineer an energy efficiency plan, you know what, you know, we would be able to advise, like, what exemptions you might be entitled to, you know, get kind of like a runway of time, maybe years to implement your plan. And so once we come up with a plan, and before we would actually even let the city know, we would float it to them and say, hey, you know, we have a client, this is what they're looking to do. Maybe over the next 5 or 10 years, they want to be a good citizen, they want to be a good actor, but this is a reality of, I think, what they could do, and see how and see how they react, and hope. And usually it's positive. People in this who work in the city, they have similar goals. They want to see the building be successful. Yeah, things happen. Each building is a little different, just like each person is different. And as long as you have a responsible plan that you can work with them, you should be able to avoid the fines or any issues, because generally that's what they're just looking to do, is just to have a clean neighborhood.
Yeah, no, that's really well said. And I think you're right. I think there's some good sentiment, and as long as there's some good actor. So what you're in part saying is, when I had a really good story, but I was going to turn in my paper late to my professor, I should have called you, and you could have helped me navigate turning in the paper late without getting my grade dinged that much.
Exactly.
I see how it works. Well, and the thing else I'll mention, to sort of put some clarity on this as well, you know, Juan and his practice, you know, pretty much every co-op and condominium building has a co-op and condo attorney sort of represents them and helps them navigate through the normal stuff that is happening in co-op and condo management and oversight. But this isn't the normal. This is something that's new, a little bit out of the blue, but not, I don't want to say out of the blue. It's coming from a different perspective and is still catching many people sort of unawares, and requires a kind of expertise, a connectivity, knowing how to swim in those waters that your typical transaction or a typical co-op and condo attorney on the board oversight side isn't necessarily well equipped to handle this kind of intersection. So Juan, you and your firm are a good resource that sort of supplements that as it relates to a situation like this. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn to Dennis, to you next. And, you know, every building, not every building, most buildings have a managing agent. Not all of them are ORCID. They probably all should be, but not all of them are ORCID. But why don't you share some thoughts on, you know, how people, our community here, can connect with their managing agent, and or, you know, you and the ORCID team?
Really, you have to be asking the right questions. don't just rely on a letter grade on the front of the building. You got a B or an A and think you're done with it. Ask about if they are being proactive. Are they investing in time into a long-term capital plan for these projects? I'm going to briefly share one more piece of information that highlights this point, that buildings with an A or a B, it doesn't mean they're done. This is a schedule of actual fines and penalties for buildings, about 150 buildings, and I've highlighted the A grades with significant fines and penalties scheduled for 2030. I did a rough number on this page. There's about 48 entries, and 12 of them are high grades with fines and penalties in 2030.
Yeah.
These buildings should be looking at this information now. The board should be discussing what their long-term capital plan is. They should be looking at that local 87 report and what the recommendations are for them to reduce their carbon footprint, and again, reduce their energy bills now. And that'll have a great impact on the operating budget, but also long-term capital budget. You're going to be avoiding those fines and penalties.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, great. Well, Bruce, I'm going to turn to you. Last but not least, thoughts and perspective on the, residential real estate transaction participants here as they're engaging and moving forward. What are your words of wisdom?
I think knowledge is power. And I was going to, again, ask a question rather than answer one, but, it's unrelated, but Brian's firm has this thing called site plan, where you can find out for a really small charge compared to what they usually charge, whether or not there's going to be building next to your building, a block from wherever. I mean, they do a site plan study. And in not every situation do you need it, but in certain ones you might want it. For example, if you have a bad C, I'm not going to say a C because I just learned that A's and B's could be a problem. Is there, without someone going and actually doing a physical inspection, is there a way from the experts on the panel where you could give an address and they could look online and get enough of an idea based on the heating and the year it was built, and maybe even the schedule, the description of property and improvements in the offering plan, just an idea of, good, fair, poor, like expensive, not so bad, etc. And I would just say in general, I think this is something that needs to be on everybody's radar.
Yeah.
The latest number and letter grades are available to the public on DOB now. It's simply the website. So you can see if they have a very low D, and then clearly they'll have major work. But again, don't end your inquiry at the letter grade and the most recent score.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. By the way, the easy way to get to the DOB now, I just did it while we were on the phone. You go to DOB now, you put the address in. Right under what pops up are a couple of tabs, like 5 tabs horizontally. Right under it, it says energy rating or something. You click on view and it gives you a grade score and a number score.
Yeah.
And then I was just going to say, on the building information system on the DOB website, you can always see what permits have been pulled for like new boilers and heating, HVAC, whatever it is. So that's a little way to dig into it a little bit more, see how new the equipment is.
That's right. One that's sort of like a way of starting to see, like, are they being a little proactive on this? Have they been making moves? Okay, wonderful. Well, we're nearly at time. I want to put one more question out there for you, Juan. As I look at things, we've just talked a lot about our current state of affairs and how it's going to impact us, even if a lot of our audience and ourselves didn't know about it. But like, here's some new information. Any other? I want to come back to the question of like future perspective. Is we've got a new Adams administration, or new administration, the Adams administration. Thoughts on, perspective on lawsuit? Give us some thoughts on, is this going to change, or what do we know?
I think that it's not, nobody knows for sure, but Mayor Adams has been pretty receptive to the real estate industry. Under de Blasio, there was a freeze on all rents all the time, no matter what you did.
Yeah.
So I think that's unfrozen. So I think that shows that he's looking to work with everyone. He sees how important the industry is. So I think now would be the time where I would negotiate this, just like he did in Soho, right? They changed somewhat what they did. I think this is something he definitely could ask. He's going to give you a fair shake, I think.
Okay. Good feedback. Well, with that, I want to again thank you, Richard, Gary, Kathleen, the whole HGAR team for hosting these series for your membership. It's an honor to get to come moderate them with you, and thank you immensely, Peter, Dennis, Juan, Bruce, for your participation today and your sage advice, your expert insights. Thank you so much for taking your time and spending it with us today. And for everyone who will get to watch this here and after. So thank you, everyone. Have a great day, and go take this and be your best out in the marketplace. Let this help you improve your practice. Take care, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Thank you.